Hello, and welcome to today's Heart and Stroke webinar. I will now welcome Jennifer Michaud, Health Promotion and Research Coordinator for People with Lived Experience Engagement at Heart and Stroke.
Thank you, Kirsten. I want to start by acknowledging the land on which I sit today here in Chestermere, just outside of Calgary, Alberta. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We're gathered today because of a shared commitment to equity and health equity in particular. By sharing this acknowledgement, we are showing our commitment to reconciliation and increasing our awareness of Indigenous history and perspectives. Heart and Stroke is focused on building meaningful and collaborative partnerships to improve health outcomes for all people. So I encourage you to reflect on what this acknowledgement means for you and your work and in your lives from coast to coast to coast, or wherever you may find yourself as you listen to our speakers today. Heart and Stroke employees across the country have been working rapidly to bring you reliable and credible information as we navigate these times. We've created a specific COVID-19 page on our website to share our extensive and ever-growing list of resources. Visit www.heartandstroke.ca/coronavirus and click on the links for tips and information, webinar recordings, articles, and resources. As for what's new and upcoming at Heart and Stroke, our survey on the impact of COVID-19 on our heart and stroke community is still active. If you're an individual who's experienced a heart condition, stroke, or vascular cognitive impairment, or if you're a caregiver of one or more individuals who've experienced these conditions, we want to hear from you. We hope to understand the impacts of COVID-19 on you and your health, how you've managed and adapted, and your needs going forward. All responses given in the survey will be completely anonymous. The combined survey results will help to shape our priorities moving forward. And upon completion, you have the chance to win a Heart and Stroke hoodie, so visit the link to enter your responses. On June 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern, we'll have the next webinar in our series, where we'll be welcoming a pharmacist, dietitian, and person with lived experience to answer any questions around managing your medications and nutritional needs during COVID-19. And on June 7th, starting at 12 p.m. Eastern, we hope you can join us for the Manulife Heart and Stroke Virtual Ride for Heart. Stay tuned for more details on this exciting virtual event later on in today's webinar. And just before we get started today, we'd like to share with you our public service announcement that we've been working rapidly on to share a very important message.
The community is alarmed at the devastating impact of the pandemic. Too afraid to seek urgent care, people with heart conditions or stroke are suffering at home, risking irreversible harm. This is causing complications not seen for decades. Hospitals have taken extra precautions, so don't hesitate to seek care or to call 911 if someone has signs of heart attack, stroke, or cardiac arrest. Do not let COVID-19 destroy more lives. Learn more at heartandstroke.ca.
Thank you. Okay, so let's jump right into our webinar today. Next slide. Thank you. There can be many unknowns at this time for people managing heart conditions, the impacts of stroke and vascular cognitive impairment. People are experiencing changes with the new normal, and we're starting to adjust to warmer weather. So we wanted to chat about some activities you can continue while maintaining physical distancing and safety. This is your opportunity to ask questions about staying active and staying involved with recreation and leisure activities during a pandemic. As Kirsten mentioned, my name is Jennifer. My co-moderator today is Kristen Hanshorst, and she's ready to help relay your questions to our panelists. And our panelists today are Patty LeBlanc, Jennifer Ridgway, and Dr. Kim Koros. I'll begin by inviting each panelist to take 3 minutes to introduce themselves and let us know what they're observing during this time and any important information they'd like to share out of the gate. And then we'll move right into the Q&A portion of the webinar. And a reminder to start and continue submitting your questions now, and we will try to get to as many as we can during our time together today. Our first panelist to introduce themselves today will be Patty LeBlanc. Take it away, Patty.
Good morning, Heart and Stroke in Canada. Thank you for having me. My name is Patty LeBlanc, and and I have no disclosures. I had a SCAD heart attack about 4 years ago, 3 days before Christmas. I was in the healthiest stage of my life, 0 risk factors. SCAD heart attack is the type of heart attack that can affect women with zero risk factors. SCAD heart attack is a spontaneous coronary artery dissection. My artery tore and blocked my artery and had a heart attack. I was a runner before I had my heart attack, and I was very nervous to start running after. The most important thing they told me, my cardiologist told me, was to listen to my heart, and I always do that. When I'm running, if I feel tired, I walk. If I wake up and I have a tired day, I take a rest day. But listening to my heart was very important. In my points there, it's invest in rest, and that's something that's very important to. If I have a busy week, I make sure I have a day or two where I've scheduled nothing. Rest is very important. Another little thing that keeps me motivated is signing up for an event. There's nothing like knowing that you have a 5K or a 10K coming up, and you don't want to look like a zombie when you cross the finish line. So it's important to train. I also wear a heart rate monitor. I'm not supposed to get my heart rate over 130, which means I'm very slow. I am slow. I've always was a slow runner. Now I'm even slower. Actually, when I sign up for a 5K or a 10K, I have to phone the race director ahead of time and ask them if they mind slow runners, because I always come in last. But I know what's important. A mile is a mile. It doesn't matter if it takes you 20 minutes to do that mile or 10 minutes to do that mile. It's important to do that mile. The other things that keep me motivated were spite. I didn't want to come across as a damaged or a sick person, so I was going to prove to the world that I could keep running, that I wasn't going to let this get me down. And I just kept doing things slow. Other little motivators for me is sharing my story, volunteering for Heart and Stroke, or our local hospital, visiting other patients that have survived heart attacks, sharing my story. I think the hardest part for me is getting off the couch. So I always promise myself, if I can head out the door for 10 minutes, if I still want to rest, I'll come back. But usually after 10 minutes, I keep going for another 10. And that's all. Thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Patty. Our next panelist is Jennifer Ridgway. Over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you. So I'm Jennifer Ridgway, and I'm a recreation therapist and the professional practice leader at Bridgepoint Hospital, which is part of Sinai Health in Toronto, Ontario, and I don't have any disclosures today. Yeah, so here's just a tiny bit about me. The top picture there is myself and my family at the Grand Canyon, because we love to hike and be outside. And below you can see my dog, who thinks he should be coming everywhere that I go. And I love therapeutic recreation button there. And therapeutic recreation is a profession that utilizes recreation and leisure-based activities to address the needs of an individual. And those needs could be physical, cognitive, emotional, social, or spiritual. And it's really about helping the individual reach their highest level of independence and quality of life. So a couple of key messages I just want to touch on in the introduction here is that activities should be meaningful to you. So if there's something you know is good for you, but you can't stand doing it and you dread doing it, and those 20 minutes feel like hours, it's just not the activity for you. You know, you should find things that bring you joy or feel rewarding. Maybe they challenge you and you get a sense of achievement. Those are things that you're going to be intrinsically motivated to keep doing. And they'll bring a positive aspect to your life. So right now, I think social connections and reducing social isolation is probably more important than ever with the current COVID situation. And having social connections really helps us with our resilience, our outlook, and our general health overall. So I think, you know, with so many community centers being closed, or gyms or parks or restaurants or stores, we need to be creative to find ways that we can still stay connected to one another. And technology is a wonderful way. And we could be doing workouts online, doing workouts with each other. or just encouraging each other if we're, tracking how many steps we take. And, we have a friend or family member who might not even live in the same town, but if we look at, the distance between and we both track our steps and we see, when we're actually coming together, we could still be encouraging one another. And another way when we think about social connections and encouraging one another is the language that we use. So I think that people should be mindful and kind of reflect on how they speak to individuals who maybe are experiencing a barrier to physical activity, and using words like "you should" or "this would be good for you" is not encouraging, and it often makes people defensive. And changing your language just slightly to, "let's go walk," or "I'd like to get outside and get some fresh air," or "you know what, the dog's getting kind of chubby, we should walk the dog more often and be better pet owners," can be a more encouraging way. And the final thing I just want to say today too is that this is a great time to try something new. There's so many resources that are online and are free right now. So if you've always wanted to try a dance class or seated yoga or any low impact exercise class, there's tons of resources online to stay connected. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Our final panelist is Dr. Kim Koros. Over to you, Dr. Koros.
Thanks again to the group for having us. It's an honor to be here to speak with a great group of co-presenters. So my role is physiatrist. It's a medical discipline that focuses on disorders of muscle, bone, and nerve with an aim to help improve function and quality of life for individuals. So my only disclosure really is that I'm passionate about physical activity, particularly for individuals who have physical or cognitive disabilities. And unfortunately, no one really pays you for that, but it is a passion that I have. And I do get some consulting services to work with Paralympic and Olympic athletes at the Canadian Sport Institute. But I think all disclosure is just good. And if you move on to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about my day-to-day. So typically, I work on the neurologic rehabilitation unit at Bridgepoint. And as I mentioned, I also work with some athletes. My role has a focus on medical education as well, and I've helped with developing an exercise curriculum for our undergraduate medical students to help encourage all medical practitioners to provide exercise advice as part of their practice, because we know that it has a whole host of benefits in cardiovascular disease as well as depression, prevention and treatment of certain, or prevention and prevention for certain cancers. So there's a whole host of benefits that we can utilize by having this in our sort of toolbox. So the take-home points that I would stress during this pandemic would be to focus on factors within your control. So one of those is the amount of physical activity that you're getting. But if that's not something that you're comfortable with doing right now, then you can also focus on things like stress management, appropriate nutrition, optimizing your sleep habits, and even just educating yourself. Again, as Jennifer mentioned, there's a number of free resources available online now. And some people have more time, although some people have the opposite problem. And this is also an excellent time to start working on formation of routines, so that when things do return to a little bit more normalcy, that's something that you started building into your life already. The really important thing for me to highlight here is that it's still suggested to seek emergency care when needed, particularly if you have underlying cardiovascular disease, signs or symptoms of cardiovascular disease or stroke, such as new or worsening chest, arm, or jaw pain, shortness of breath at rest or with mild exercise, dizziness or feeling faint, racing heart rate or palpitations, any of those things out of the norm. We're still suggesting that you seek emergency care, and we're taking appropriate precautions to prevent the spread or contagious infection from COVID-19 in those areas. And lastly, movement is medicine. So as I mentioned, people's scenarios are all different during this pandemic phase. And we know from studying exercise that any movement is really good movement. So I don't think, I train for triathlons in my spare time. My training has definitely reduced as a result of my other responsibilities during this time. And I just keep telling myself that, like, any movement is good movement. And I think that's true. You know, going from nothing to even just walking up and down your halls a few times a day can be optimal for or help optimize your health. So we don't have to reach for the stars in the current climate, but anything that you do to drive that forward is helpful from a health perspective.
Thanks so much, Kim. And thank you, Jennifer and Patty as well, for your perspectives on this really important topic. We've prompted you through the webinar dashboard to make sure to send in your questions. And again, reminding you, this is your opportunity to really meet our experts and ask them live while you have them right here in front of you. So we have a few already that have come in, so we'll get started. And I'll pose this to all of you, maybe starting with Kim and Jennifer. As we start to move into hotter parts of the year, how do you propose people manage temperature and staying active, whether it be for exercise or leisure? And then Patty, I'd really love your perspective on how you manage this personally, especially with running and outdoor activities. So first, Kim, maybe?
Sure. So I think, and this is a general rule again for anyone who is exercising with less access to typical healthcare resources, I'll say, it's really important to have proper warm up and cool down. And I think you have to dress for the weather. So if you actually Google like dress the runner, there are different tools out there that can help you choose what type of clothing is appropriate to try and ensure that you're not overheating. Things like ingesting liquids is appropriate, particularly for longer bouts of exercise. Making sure you have appropriate sun protection, so sunscreen and a hat. Again, individuals who have neurologic disorders sometimes don't have that sensation, and they can forget and end up with a burn. So I think just taking appropriate precautions, and especially highlighting the importance of an appropriate warm up and cool down, listening to your body, and stopping if you're having those red flag symptoms that we talked about.
So I think just to add to Kim's points as well, I think, timing is important. So I think that if you're going to be doing some physical exercise that, is going to require exertion, you definitely don't want to do it, kind of between noon and 3 at the hottest time of the day. And I think when possible, depending on where you live and what kind of parks and conservation areas might be open, there could be some shady places that you might be able to walk where there's still some great hills for a challenge. And also remembering that, 30 minutes of activity, whether you do 30 minutes all at once, or if you have, 3 times where you do 10 minutes of activity each time is still great movement, and it's still activity. So I think you can also space out your exercise as well.
During the school year, I work in a school, so I often run at 5 in the morning. And then come summer, I continue to run at 5 in the morning, just because that's the coolest time of the day for me. And I'm not good with heat. And I feel like, I don't know if it's the beta blockers or what it is, but I feel like I'm even have less tolerance for heat now. So I still keep it at 5 in the morning. And I promise myself every day, I'll have a nap. I'll get up at 5. You can have a nap in 3 or 4 hours, even though I never do, but that promise of the nap gets me out of bed at 5 in the morning. And before I run, I always take about 5 minutes and have a cup of like peppermint tea, like a cooling tea. I don't know, in my heart and in my mind, it makes me feel better before I leave the house.
Thanks all. So the next question is from an individual who's asking that they don't know how hard they can push themselves during exercise. They really would prefer to do this in a professional setting like rehab or even in a gym where there's actual monitoring. But because of certain COVID-19 protocols, that's not feasible right now. So are you aware of any apps or remote way to have supervision? So maybe start with Kim, and Jennifer and Patty, you can weigh in with any ideas or perspective you have too.
Yeah, so I think it's a very insightful question, especially for people who have complex medical histories. It's tough to give sort of like a one-size-fits-all piece of advice. Typically, we would refer many of these patients who've had heart attacks or heart disease, stroke, to a cardiac rehab program that does offer supervision. I spoke to one of the medical directors for a local cardiac rehab program, and he said in Ontario, at least, about 60% of the centers are offering some sort of intervention. So it doesn't look the same way that it normally does, but they're still available to provide advice via the telephone in terms of what that progression might look like, taking into context your specific history or medical history. So I think that's certainly one option. If you're otherwise sort of healthy, I agree. I mean, personally, like, I think it comes down sometimes to a values decision. And as I mentioned, I've reduced some of my training load just to make myself feel a little bit better. I think there's some low tech ways to do it that don't involve necessarily the healthcare system in terms of connecting with friends. So one thing that I'm doing is sort of online strength workouts, and I'm using FaceTime or Zoom or one of those social connecting apps to do it with a friend. So it's possible that even though you're physically distanced, you can still use the social connection piece to supervise each other. And that way, if you're feeling uncomfortable, there's someone else who you can bounce those ideas off of. But certainly, you know, for individuals who have underlying cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease like diabetes, kidney disease, you know, I don't think you would be wrong, and I think I would encourage you to reach out to your healthcare provider for advice around your specific situation. And you know, arm yourself with that knowledge that many of the cardiac rehab centers are functioning in some way, and ask for a referral. Some of the centers actually don't even require a physician referral. You can self-refer. So I think that's worth doing a little bit of research into your local center.
Thanks, Kim. Jennifer or Patty?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Kim was pretty comprehensive, but some of the outpatient rehab facilities are also doing virtual visits as well, which can be really helpful for you to view technique. I think it's one thing when we see instructions that are written on our paper exercise program, but I think going through them with somebody and ensuring that you're doing them correctly can help people with their confidence. And I think, you know, there's many of the programs that are online that say that they're low intensity, or sometimes they'll also have recommendations. So if maybe you're not as stable on your feet or have some concerns with balance, sorry, my voice went. They'll sometimes suggest like using a chair just so that you can feel a little bit more confident and secure. So I think, you know, I think Patty mentioned listening to your body, and I think that's the most important thing as well. If anything doesn't feel right, or if you've done an exercise and then the next day you're quite sore, you know that was too much for you. So I think it's really, you know, doing your best to be more physically active and make healthy lifestyle choices right now, but without really taking yourself to that, you know, unsafe place.
Hi. One thing that I do, my heart rate monitor is I'm dedicated. I follow my heart rate monitor always. But on the odd time, there's been a few times where I haven't charged it before I left, or it died halfway through. And being a nervous Nelly, what I do is I do a talk test. And as long as I can talk without panting and having to stop, I feel like I'm okay. And even if I'm by myself, I'll just sing the alphabet song. And if I can sing it well, to me, I feel like I'm not pushing myself too hard.
That's a great tip.
Yeah, if I can add to Patty's tip, I think that's, you know, the number one tip that I give out to individuals. You know, the recommendations from a physical health perspective are moderate to vigorous activity, but there's benefits to mild physical activity as well. And so you can use the talk test as a gauge to your intensity of exercise. So if you're able to sing, that's sort of more on the mild to low moderate end of the range. If you can talk but not sing, you find yourself in the moderate category. And if you have difficulty talking, then you're in the vigorous category. So that's one way to help yourself figure out sort of where you are. And again, to decide, you know, what you're comfortable with in terms of the current situation.
Thank you. So here's a question for Jennifer. For instances when the person, in this case, who suffered a stroke is still an inpatient for their stroke rehab, so their family is unable to be present with them right now because of no visitors, how do you suggest encouraging physical activity because they can't say, let's go for a walk or do that sort of more social motivation? Are there any tools or tips for encouraging that healthy lifestyle from a distance?
Yeah, so this person who's experienced a stroke, if they're an inpatient at the hospital, they should have opportunities with the rehab care team. So there could be some people are still doing small groups that are quite physically distant. So rooms that would usually have 30 people in, they're running groups of just maybe 5 with great distance between each of the patients, and none of those patients being on precautions. So they could still have gentle exercise programs. I know we're also at our hospital, we're utilizing iPads. And so we're using a program that's free right now on the internet. So there's a Dancing with Parkinson's program. And although not everyone has Parkinson's, it's just a very gentle exercise program that's it's really great to explore movement through music. And it's very soft and encouraging. So we're using some web-based and some of the clinical teams are providing either independent exercise programs. They're still using the gym, just fewer people at a time. And again, nobody who's on precautions and extra cleaning. And then there's also more social exercise groups where people really want to work on self-management of their symptoms.
Great. So a comment and question, and I'll put this to all 3 of you for any ideas you may have. As you are all aware, of course, access to the internet, familiarity with apps or social media really varies from person to person. So how can you recommend, or are there any resources that you recommend for patients or individuals who are maybe not as comfortable or even just able to access online resources for staying active and connected right now? Any ideas?
In terms of, my experience is providing virtual care, it's often grandchildren who are helping their grandparents. So I think even though someone can't necessarily be there, you can talk over the phone and someone can kind of talk you through it. It's actually, in my experience, been a great way for those 2 generations to connect. So I guess that would be one suggestion, is if you have younger family members who are very adept at technology. Even I get help from like my 3-year-old sometimes, but that's one suggestion.
I just want to say too that not everybody prefers technology. So I think definitely getting help for people who would love to try technology and who just aren't that savvy at the moment. But then other things, I know for my own dad, his greatest motivation is Starbucks. So he would never do an online exercise class, but Starbucks in Ontario is just open back up again. And I'll say to him, like, you don't need to park closest to the front door for your coffee, like park at the other end, and then at least walk the 5 minutes and grab your coffee. And then don't just get back in the car and drive home, walk down the street and see as construction started again, have some stores opened up. So even though he's 76 and does have a cell phone, he's not great at it and he's not even that interested. So I think there's even just some really practical things that we can do in our community. And I think being out in the community is really important as well. When he gets home and he's, seeing what streets have opened up, or some of our streets in Ontario are considered quiet streets. They're shutting down traffic so that there's more space for people to walk. So that's great for him to explore. And then when he goes back home and sees his neighbor on his porch, he can, tell him what's going on, and that's increasing those social interactions and sense of community. So I think online leveraging technology is really exciting, and so much has happened in that area. But I still think we can also encourage people to do low tech options.
I'm a letter writer, so I like writing letters, and I hope that the seniors in my family that I write to, when they write me letters back, that they have to walk to the mailbox. So write a letter and walk to the mailbox.
I love that. That's great. Okay, so a little bit of a different question, more specific. Are there any lower extremity exercises or programs that can be done at home, especially when people maybe aren't feeling comfortable leaving their home? Kim or Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always hard because these situations are so individualized. I'm finding there's a lot of gyms, like yoga places that are offering online classes, which I think is great. Yeah, I don't have a specific recommendation in mind from a lower extremity perspective. I think there's a ton of things you can do, you know, things like squats and lunges, depending on sort of your hip and joint mobility and any pain. You can do seated straight leg raises, anything really that keeps you moving. And I mean, you don't need fancy equipment. You can use chairs, you can use cans. Hopefully you've stocked up. But yeah, I don't think it doesn't have to be special. It just has to be moving.
I think even just marching on the spot when you're watching TV, if you march for commercials, sit for the program, or vice versa.
Thank you.
I was thinking just one more thinking, if you have a great, secure railing and you happen to have a home with a basement, for example, taking the stairs, a few times a day because you have something to hang on to is a great challenge as well.
So another question that we have had come in, this individual is asking, and this is again a little bit more specific, what would you expect to be the average recovery time for someone who has maybe had a heart condition and they're trying to work through their rehab at home, and how can they kind of manage their expectations when their rehab plan has maybe shifted from what it otherwise would have been if they were not living through COVID-19, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the best resource is probably medical, like direct medical members of your team. So that can be done by either connecting through your family physician, cardiologist, and or local cardiac rehab facility. They'll really be able to give you guidance about your situation specifically, because there are different recommendations for different interventions or conditions. So for example, like, light weights aren't suggested for 6 to 8 weeks after having bypass. So that's something that's really specific to individuals and their healthcare. What I would say in terms of adjusting your expectations, and one thing that I've had to take my own advice is trying to focus on some positives. So your rehab might look a little bit different than it did before, but on the positive, maybe it gives you a little bit more time to look at things like stress management, or to educate yourself about the importance or what dietary changes you're going to be making. Maybe you can sleep a little bit better. Maybe you have to spend less time commuting, and so you can spend a little bit more time with your family. So yeah, one thing that we've been doing in my family is sort of at the dinner table talking about what was the best part of our day. When things were getting really hard, it was always nice to be able to look for the fact that there was one great thing that happened to you that day. And then that sort of breeds more positives, I think, in terms of training your brain to recognize the positive aspects of the situation.
So I agree with Kim, and I just want to add on, because we've talked a lot about the physical resources that are available for free online. There's also so many leisure interests. So if you've never been kind of an artsy person but always wanted to try, there's a lot of like learn to draw kind of programs where it can help you relax and with your stress management, but also maybe a sense of achievement. And I think it's also important to, when we set those goals and we think what we think our recovery should look like and how quickly we should get there, I think it's really important to celebrate all those successes along the way and really keep that in mind. And I think Kim's point, like the best part of your day helps you do that as well, that you have achieved the smaller goals that are getting you to that larger goal. But the overall health by doing other things that also bring you joy and also make you feel positive and feel hopeful and help you build your resilience, I think that it all comes together for your overall health.
something had told me that the first year was recovering. Like it didn't really matter. I shouldn't say it didn't really matter, but I had a heart attack, and even though I was healthy when I had it, I still had a heart attack, so my heart still had to heal. And that first year, I remember being many hurdles, like, and highs and lows, physical and mental. But even 4 years out now, I still am gentle with myself. When I have a low energy day or sometimes just a sad day, I just listen to my body. Again, just listen. And, you know, if my body says go, I go. If my body says rest, I rest. So I think just there's so much to be said for just listening to your body, listening to your heart.
Okay, so another question that I have, I'll put to Patty first, actually. I'm wondering, because you said invest in rest, and that you used invest in rest. I think that's a really important message that we talk about too. So I think at the beginning of this time, everyone had their list. So I'm going to make my sourdough bread, and I'm going to clean up all my clutter, and I'm going to learn to sew. How do you manage the rest side of staying active to really take care of your body as an important piece of staying active?
Whether I'm planning my day or like a typical week, you know, I might have a meeting every night of the week, but I don't do that anymore. I would book an in between, like I might have something Monday evening, then nothing Tuesday, maybe something Wednesday, and then I won't do anything Friday. And when it comes to planning a day, and I will do all those things. I was going to learn to make sourdough and sew and whatever, but even just booking my lunch and not allowing myself to stand and eat my lunch. Booking lunch, like lunch is going to be from 12 till 12:45. I'm not going to do anything but eat my lunch, and really trying hard to stick to that, and knowing that it has as much value as everything else on my to-do list. It's the most important, because if I don't do that, invest in rest, some of the other things might not get done. But I think just investing and making, and I've learned, and some days I forget, but that rest is so important and so valuable.
Thanks, Patty. That is a really great viewpoint around taking that time to rest. I think we've got just one more question here, considering time, that I think is related to this, and we could possibly look at Kim and Jennifer also helping us out with this answer. So we've got a question saying that, you know, if a person is worried about getting their sleep habits or their sleep hygiene back to normal after a traumatic event, and you know, they do want to rest and they're trying to listen to their body, but they're also trying to make sure that they are awake long enough to get back into those scheduled rest sleep routines. Is there anything that you'd recommend to help with that? Do you think it's best to rest when you need to, or do you think it's best to transition into a try to, you know, stay awake longer so that you can sleep at those suggested set times? Maybe Dr. Couros first.
Again, I'll caveat this with it kind of depends on your individual medical scenario, because there are some medical conditions, including sleep apnea, which can cause daytime sleepiness. And, you know, there is some medical intervention that can help with that and give you more energy in the day. So I think in terms of like generic sleep hygiene advice that we would provide, given someone who's otherwise healthy, making sure you're avoiding screens for an hour before you go to bed. So one thing that I've adopted in the pandemic times is reading again before bed instead of watching the news, to make sure you're getting optimal sleep, essentially. And I think also you have to see it sometimes as a reflection of your mood. Anxiety, depression, those things can all present as sleep abnormalities. And so really, you know, ask yourself, is there a mood component again, which maybe you can do something about from a social connection standpoint, and or seeing your healthcare provider.
I'd like to just add that I think structure can really help a lot as well. I think I know at the hospital in our therapeutic recreation department, for example, one of the morning programs that we run is a coffee social, and it's really, it's not till 10, so we're not asking people to get up really early, but it's just helps with routine that it's morning time. I'm going to have my breakfast, and I'm going to get dressed, and then I'm going to go and see others and be with others, and when there's things that are structured and things that are taking place, then we tend to be awake. Whereas sometimes, especially during a pandemic, when many people's routines have been greatly disrupted, if there's nothing going on all day or they don't have anything scheduled or booked, they might think, oh, I'm going to have a nap. But it's maybe not necessarily that they're physically tired at the time. Maybe it's just they're bored and nothing's going on. And then that can disrupt a sleep pattern. I think if you're in a rehab program and you've exercised in the gym and you're having a short nap after lunch, then staying awake and doing more activity and then sleeping at night, then that nap may be needed. But I think that there's a difference between just having a really unstructured day, and then sometimes we see patients then get mixed up with day and night because it doesn't have the same meaning for them. So I think structure really helps.
I would have to second the reading and getting, as Dr. Kim had said, to instead of watching TV maybe, or for me, it's reading a book, like an actual book, not reading on my iPad or my phone, but to actually read a book has been helpful for me.
Great, thank you all. So we're just about at the end of our time here. I'd like to invite you all to make any last comments that you'd like people to take away from this. We'll start with Patty.
I think just to listen to your body and listen to your heart. And if you don't feel like doing anything today, sometimes having a shower is an accomplishment. And if that's what your accomplishment is today, be proud of that. That's all.
Thanks, Patty.
If I'm next, I think explore new things and try new things, because it could be something that you really enjoy and be another positive outlet for you. And I think that everyone's going through a great amount of change, but sometimes it's an opportunity to discover something new and something that you either want to strive for or a new goal.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's helpful to acknowledge to yourself that these are not typical times, but also to challenge yourself to move past that as best you can in terms of seeing the positives and just making small steps towards positive change in your mind. So again, just any amount of movement that you can do, any amount of, you chose the piece of fruit over the chocolate bar that day, try and celebrate your small successes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Patty LeBlanc, Jennifer Ridgway, Dr. Kim Koros, we really appreciate your time and your advice here. For everyone who has been on the call with us, if you or a loved one has experienced heart disease, stroke, or vascular cognitive impairment, we have our online communities on Facebook that we encourage you to join or to tell your loved ones about to join. There's one specific to survivors and one specific to care supporters. And they're both moderated groups with conversation and moderation in French and English. And then finally today, we want to talk to you once more about our virtual event for Ride for Heart. It's happening on June 7th at 12 p.m. Eastern. You can go to www.rideforheart.ca for more information, and we'll play a quick video here for you guys to watch. Thank you so much for attending.
Every year, Canadians take to the streets to walk, ride, and rally in support of the Manulife Heart and Stroke Ride for Heart. This June, the streets may be empty, but we will stay active for our first ever virtual event. We will lace up, break a sweat, and make a difference from a distance, together.